Okay, welcome to week four of Introduction to Corrections. And you know what that means, don't you? We got one more lecture to go. There is no lecture for week 6, and then the course ends soon. So let's just jump right in and take a look at my sharing my screen. Oh, that's right, I got to put it up first. Let me put this up, and then we can do that. But in the meantime, one of the things I do want to say is that there's still a few of you that haven't caught on to what I have said over and over, and it's as tedious as I can possibly say it, and that is make sure that you, let's get to the course home, make sure that you put citations in your body and references at the end. I said that uh, constantly with the rubric. I'll mention it again tonight. And people have gotten lower grades simply because of that. And so you can see here that our week 1, 2, and 3 are here. And tonight we'll have week 4, and then next Wednesday will be our final lecture. All right, so before we get to the announcement for the week, let's look at the calendar. And you can see this is where we are. Normally we're right here, but the lecture was moved to today. I didn't change it on my calendar because when I get ready to use that calendar again, I wouldn't want to have to shift it. And then you'll see your initial posts were due Monday on intermediate sanctions. And then the reply post on the same is due Saturday. And then your written assignment about probation officers, your quiz. Again, I remind you, you got 3 times. I've been deducting, some people have been still trying to get their quiz in on Mondays, and you haven't been getting those points because of what I said. And then your live classroom lecture. Okay, and then our final week starts the 3rd. And you can see, if I flip it over to August, this is where we are going to be. You see, this is where we are right now. And then you'll see that next week is the last full week because your class actually ends the 11th. The 11th. That is the last day of class, not the 12th, not the 14th, not the 15th, not the 16th, but the 11th. All right, and all assignments have to be in at that particular time. All right, so you're clear on that. Let's go to the announcement again. Okay, let's refresh it and let's open it up. So our announcement for this week, we deal with prisoner rights and probation and the evolution of probation and what it's all about. Chapters 8 and 9 of American Corrections. I emailed those to you. You should have that. You should have the PowerPoints and the additional information as well. And then we're going to just spend a little time talking about the law of corrections, prisoner rights, Bill of Rights and community supervision, little corrections law and prisoner right, little activity, sentencing and sanctions, and then conclude with the vocabulary review, Now, the evolving role of the probation officer is one of the things I may or may not cover, but we'll see how we go in terms of that. Intermediate sanction, again, your initial post was due 2 nights ago, and your reply post is due Saturday. And then your written assignment, probation officer, and then, of course, your quiz that you get 3 shots at. And then complete the mid-quarter survey that is due as well. Then you know about my motto. So let's take a look at the module for the week and the assignments in there. So intermediate sanctions. Intermediate sanctions are often used by probation officers to help an individual. So you're going to use this fact pattern, and you're going to determine uh, what intermediate sanctions are, and what to use for Pat's violation, and then support the sanction selection, explaining why you picked the one that you did, and problems and any issues, due process, and then your response, choose a different one to respond to, okay? So your written assignment is based upon this scenario here. That is a very real scenario, where it says that County X continues to struggle with overcrowding in their jail. That's why I say it's a very real scenario. And so the board hires 4 new probation officers to provide alternatives to jail, some community supervision. And the officers who have been with the county for a few years are more in the belief that their job is about surveillance. And the new probation director has extensive background related to evidence-based practices and believe that the probation officer role is about assessing the probationers and changing their behavior. So then you come in and you understand what the concepts of evidence-based practices are, and what the many roles or hats that probation officers wear. You know, like you're a counselor. I mean, you're a bounty hunter. You're chasing behind uh, people. You are a person who that they have to give accountability to, and so you're going to create a job announcement for the new probation officer. Tell them exactly what is expected, and then you're going to use these points here to make sure that you do so. Notice it says provide support and evidence from credible sources. There it is again, popping up. And what that simply means is, some people think credible sources is providing, well, no, it's not actually a paper. It's an announcement. And it's going to be in narrative form, but it's still going to be an announcement where you want to look it up. Now, remember, announcements are really papers, but the purpose of it is to share information, and you're going to follow these bullet points and make sure. So it's not the same thing as a brochure, and it's not a poster. It is information, basically, to let the person who's applying for the position know what they are expected to do and what their responsibilities will be. Well, surveillance, these are all part of the whole thing. Yeah, it is. It is. It is. It is. And so you're going to look at the whole thing. You've got to remember what evidence-based research is. Evidence-based research is looking at the way that probationers of the past have operated and responded to being on probation and the methodologies that were used by probation officers. Okay. Broker of service, liaisons of the court, change agents, and then supporting it, as I said, with credible sources. You're going to provide stated ideas with language using grammar and spelling correctly. Here is your rubric, which essentially repeats the same thing that's due to second. Remember what I said. How many columns are in this rubric for your purposes? Yeah, well, you said it, but the key thing is I say one. Act like these others don't exist. Don't even look at them. Don't even look at the evaluation of them. It would be almost as if we just took these other three off completely. But the reason why we do this is we let students know that, well, if you don't do the requirements here, you're going to lose here. Look, proficiency, you lose 2 points. You lose 4 points. And then you lose 7 points down here. That's halfway. So you don't, and then if you look under there and you see what it is that you're doing, what you want to do is provide an exemplary summary of the continuing probation officer's duties through supporting evidence from credible sources. That's what you want to do to get those 15 points. In addition to describe the role, you want to thoroughly describe the role through supporting evidence from credible sources as well. So you're going to deal with the role of the probation officer to get 20 points exemplary, and you're going to put a summary of the duties that they have. Now, some people might say, well, the duties and roles are the same, kind of, sort of, yes, but there's a slight difference there. And then down here, examples of work, exemplary examples, through supporting evidence of examples. That didn't say an example. That means 2 or more. And then with credible resources to provide that. Please, 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 please don't everybody cite corrections. That's the textbook. You can start with it, and I don't mind you using it, but don't rely on it. As I said, we have plenty of sources in the library and learning center that you can find there. And then down here is your spelling and grammar. So I'm saying it again. Credible resources are not references. References is the source where you get the body of information that you use in your paper. So references provide the book and so forth. The citations match what your statements are, and you're supporting your statements. You're using the same information, but not as much information in citations. But you all already know that because you learn the difference between citations and references, and that's why we stress APA here as well. So again, I'll repeat again, forget about emerging competence and proficiency. Meet and ask yourself as you sit there, and I said this before, make sure that you are happy with what you put in there. And maybe you have somebody else to read it and ask them what they think of it. And the key thing is you have to remember you're preparing an opportunity for someone who's looking for a position, but you have to make sure that it's clear what is expected of those individuals. what are they supposed to do, that the roles that are required of them if they get the job. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Someone who can, like I said again, remember it's not one of your classmates, but yeah, one of you, someone you know, could be a spouse, it could be a brother or sister, a relative, somebody like that, or a really good friend who, and you kind of ask them what do they get out of what they read, and they can tell you. If they have a little trouble telling you, sometimes that means you haven't made it clear enough or plain enough. But yeah, that's absolutely right. Remember, I cannot put you in column number 4, nor proficiency, nor you end up simply in emerging, because it says missing supporting evidence from credible sources all the way down. And so you could theoretically end up with 8, 19, 30, 31, 31 points. You can end up with 31 points. And I think 60 is the optimal. So you don't want to end up there. Yeah, see, so you don't want to find yourself in that situation. Any final questions about this? Okay, looks like everybody's pretty silent. That means that everybody's got it. Okay. All right. So those are the assignments that you have for the week. The only other thing that you have down here is your quiz and your live lecture phrase that I give you, or that you come up with, that fits tonight. So we're going to deal with, important topics tonight, dealing with probation and what probation officers use, which are primarily intermediate sanctions. All right, so let's get right into what we're going to talk about. All right. So the law of corrections and prisoner rights, Bill of Rights, correction law, sentencing and sanction, evolving role of the probation officer, and then the review. Okay, so now, as you will know, and you'll learn this over and over, and then is that, let me get this out of the way here, is that we call it the 4 pillars. That's what people who are studying law and political science. It's based upon the highest um, document is the United States Constitution, which sets out the rights that individuals have. And then based upon what the legislature does on the federal level, that's House and the Senate. On the various states, you have something similar to that as well. Statutes are passed, and those statutes in either of those two cannot be contrary to the rights under the U.S. Constitution. You cannot take away uh, the rights of those. And then the cases that are decided when an individual brings an action challenging a statute to say, for example, that it violates usually their rights, or their U.S. constitutional rights, which are pretty pretty big. There are what we call 1981 cases. 1981 cases is based upon interpretation of section 1981 of the um, I think it's 18, chapter 18, United States Code, which is the federal statute that applies. And so, and then the case law, as it's saying down here, deals with decision about uh, cases. And we use a system of laws called deciding under case law, what we call stare, S-T-A-R-E, decisis, which means pretty much that we use previous decisions to try to guide us. Now, they don't control because sometimes cases are overturned or reversed. And so case law is another method that we use. And when you see the Constitution, usually it'll say section whatever, article whatever. The statute, it'll list the section of whatever statutes involved. Case law, it involves usually somebody, people of the state of Illinois versus John Doe, or somebody versus a warden or correction officer or somebody, and then it'll have the page number. It'll determine if it's U.S., that means it's United States Supreme Court, and if it has like IL, it's Illinois, and then it might say appellate court, it might say Supreme Court, the case law is. And then there's what's known as regulations. And usually there are administrative agencies that do that, such as there are various agencies. The departments of correction are one, but there are agencies like EEOC. There's other administrative agencies that have to do with the executive branch, in which the governor, in the case of states, might implement policies. Once again, those cannot violate or should not violate the U.S. Constitution. Okay, and the authority usually to operate regulations stems from the statutes in the jurisdiction. So again, I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments of the Constitution, kind of set out things for us. And in prisoner cases and jail cases, one of the most commonly used amendments is the First Amendment. And the reason is because of the fact that it's not so much the freedom of the speech aspect, definitely not the freedom of the press, or the right to peaceful assembly, or those kinds of things, but it is the establishment of religion. There are individuals from various faiths, as you'll see with these cases that come up under there, where certain religions weren't accepted before, like Muslims are as of 62. Censorship of the mail, because we're dealing with the privacy aspects and the security of the prison itself, and the rights of it says Muslims are not violated when work makes it impossible for them to attend religious services if no other alternative exists. So you can't say I'm not working because it's this or that if you're in prison. Incarcerated individuals can't just receive mail without it is checked out. And in fact, mail that often goes, it is they'll scratch out certain things in there and blotted out and those kinds of things, or redacted. And then in 2006, prison policies um, that deny magazines, newspapers, and photographs uh, to the most incorrigible residents in prison system in an effort to promote security. Um, has anybody ever heard me talk about a client of mine that got himself in a pickle from being a correction officer over magazines? Have you heard me talk about that? Probably not, unless you have had some previous classes of mine. But anyway, let me tell you. Here, let me explain to you what happened. This particular person was bringing in magazines as a favor to one of the inmates, and it wasn't pornography. It was actually, maybe a general magazine. I don't remember what kind, but it was not a pornographic. It had nothing to do with suggestive photos or anything like that. But he got terminated because there was a violation for him to bring that in. And what do you think was the problem? Anybody want to speculate on what the problem was with doing that? Anybody? Well, not approved of the guidelines, yeah, but there was something evident about these magazines that he was bringing that you probably couldn't tell. Well, anyway, here's what happened. Some people would say, and I've had other students that say they think maybe they slipped in like razor blades or things like that, or weapons in the magazines. Wasn't anything even close to that. As you know, drugs are accessible in prison. You know that. You're aware of that, right? You guys are. And that is the problem that is faced. Well, the magazines that he was bringing in looked like regular magazines, but they had been soaked in PCP and dried out and ironed out, and they looked like regular magazines. So what do you think that was happening with those magazines when they were received by the inmate? Were they reading them? They weren't licking them. Anybody else? You're close. Yeah, well, I mean, they did do that, but they were chewing it, chewing the pages, chewing the pages, just like gum. And as they were chewing it, they were getting high. I mean, and you couldn't smell it, but yeah, that was what the problem was. And those are the kinds of things that are involved in there. A lot of people would think they were like, "Oh wow," and then somebody said, "Well, did they swallow the paper?" Uh, some chewed them, some swallowed them, some spit them out. But the bottom line was, just like when you chew gum and you get the flavor of it out, they chewed the paper pages and they got so somebody says, "Oh my God, that sounds kind of nasty." When you're trying to get high, it is not about uh, the taste and flavor of it. It's about what the effects of it that it would do for you to you. So anyway, that's so the First Amendment deals with it's mainly to keep control, not to violate the rights. The Fourth Amendment, the search and seizure one, which is the big topic that you're going to discover as you get further into dealing in criminal justice, which is oftentimes used in law enforcement, that There's a whole lot of things that take place, as you are probably aware. Individuals, when they come to visit, they're able to be overheard and recorded. And so the Fourth Amendment doesn't give any privacy to those individuals for obvious reasons. And if it's not so obvious, it should be, because what they do, they can discuss things that they do. But I'll tell you this, these people are so good, they come in and they use um, all kind of uh, lingo that each of them understand, but it's still being recorded and still listened to. Um, and then your cell is not, that's not just your stuff. It is expected that anytime you can be inspected without a warrant. And so it goes with privacy. And so people thought that you would have privacy, but no. But you got to remember, it's the security of the prison. Strip searches, of course, dealing with body cavities when there's a need, and there are times when those kind of things do happen. And then finally, uh, uh, as I said, searching cells without a warrant already. Dealing with the Eighth Amendment, punishment. Now, the Eighth Amendment issue deals with the conditions of prisoners, such as their needs for medical attention, and not adequately taking care of the well-being of the inmates. That goes back to 76. Conditions of confinement in Texas prison system are not unconstitutional. People might say it's not the most humane thing. There is an organization called the John Howard Association. You can Google it and you will check, and you'll be able to discover that the John Howard Association monitors prisons. They're not a government organization, but they are able to bring things to the attention of the wardens and the correction heads, as well as to the legislators. Double selling is something that obviously is something that takes place, and so it's because of the space issue. A prison resident mistakenly shot in the leg during a disturbance does not suffer cruel and unusual punishment um, if the action was taken in good faith to maintain discipline. So, in other words, there are times when that takes place where guards will end up doing it. They do have weapons. Uh, then in 1991, said plaintiffs must not only prove that the conditions are cruel and unusual, but that they exist because of deliberate indifference. In other words, the officials were purposely neglecting. I would say that with COVID-19, there's probably a different kind of level. There's probably a strong amount of immunity where individuals are exposed to it because of the uh, overcrowding and the populations that exist in prison. That is why in some jails where people are waiting trials, many jurisdictions have tried to get nonviolent offenders out because of those kinds of reasons. Then finally, in 2003, regulations suspending visiting privileges for those who have not passed, who have failed drug tests. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the magazine. There are ways that individuals do um, uh, smuggle in um, uh, drugs also. By the way, the same thing I said about magazines also have applied and taken place in letter writing. were individuals. There have been the same thing that happened with the paper that has been used to write the letters as well. So these are just a few of the things. Then the 14th Amendment, uh, dealing with these various jurisdictions, where it said that in Alabama, they were segregating white from black individuals, is unconstitutional. The argument that the jails made was that they were fighting each other. Well, yes, but you can't solely use that as a basis. There has to be more to it than that. The um, basic elements of due process: you have a right to a hearing, and before disciplinary action takes place in prison as well. And then it says, although due process is accorded, an individual has no right to counsel in a disciplinary hearing. Now, if it reaches a constitutional issue, then we're talking differently. We're talking about an administrative issue. And then finally, the involuntary transfer of an incarcerated individual to a mental hospital requires the due process and a hearing and the elements to determine that they fit that. And then counsel is needed then, or allowed in that case. And the last one, prison regulations don't violate due process unless they are atypical and place what we call significant hardships or um, overcomplicated restrictions on individuals. And these are just a few of them. Okay, and these are all mentioned in your textbook. The Bill of Rights and Community Supervision, cases going all the way back to '87, where we talk about the warrantless searches and things like that. Um, and so we're going to skip over a lot of these. Evidence that would be barred by the exclusionary rule, in other words, evidence that would violate the Constitution, uh, can be used by the prosecution in a criminal trial, can't be used, but can be used in parole revocation hearings because of the different standard. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt standard. It's preponderance of the evidence or clear and convincing evidence, like almost like a civil case. A probationer has a right to counsel in their hearings before they can be sent back to prison. This is in what we call a VOP hearing, which is a violation of probation or a violation of parole, depending on which system you're under. Morrissey versus Brewer, I remember this extremely well, studying this in college and then in law school, where there has to be a hearing if there's probable cause, and the parolee has a right to receive due process rights, and all of these rights that are listed under here are afforded them. And at the hearing, revocation hearing, then notice of the charges also. The key thing was due process being made stronger with Morrissey versus Brewer. Gagnon versus Scarapelli in '73 said that parolees in the Morrissey versus Brewer also applied to probation as well. That's all that really did. And then finally, in the good old Cooper versus Pate case, a '64 case, a 1983, you heard me talk about that, which means the individual is bringing a suit against a correction official, applies not only to incarcerated individuals, but those on probation and parole. So that's just a few things about that. Now, this I'm not going to spend a lot of time, because you can take time and you can go ahead and do this by simply going through this. and then you'll deal with the it's a quiz, and what you're doing is you're doing the same thing. So let's just do one. Let's do the first one. Okay, let's match them. Eighth Amendment deals with what? Bail and cruel and unusual punishment. Okay. First Amendment. Yeah. And religion, remember, that's the big ticket. The search and seizure, of course, is the Fourth Amendment. And then, of course, 14th Amendment, all rights of U.S. Constitution, all citizens submitted, you are going to be correct. And so you'll do the same thing again. All right. So you've seen those before. Those are things that can help you in terms of this. All right. So now going back down, dealing with sentencing. Now let's talk about this, because this is when we're going to get to talk about the thing that is really utilized a whole lot, and the various sanctions that can be used for intermediate sanctions. So dealing from jails all the way through prison, um, the as it says, jail sentences are often shorter in duration in prison in jail. That's because, number one, people uh, have minor offenses. And what kind of offenses generally are handled in jail? Felony or misdemeanors? hmm And so those are sentences that are under a year. And so the jail sentence um, uh, can be the sole sanction, um, or we have what we call shock incarceration, maybe a condition of probation. Anybody know what shock incarceration is? Do they really shock people? Anybody know? Actually, what it really amounts to is something to show you how bad it really is, like boot camps. Like we had a thing that we used to do, and we did it with a young man several times, where we put them in a lockup, and we had a person who was really a corrections officer dressed up like he was an inmate, and they were put in a cell with him, and the person um, bothered them or threatened to rape them or something, but in reality they weren't. But what it was teaching them a lesson as to how bad. Anybody ever heard of Scared Straight? Yeah, yeah. If you look at Scared Straight, we might saw somebody say something about uh, yeah, yeah. And what that does is it kind of puts something on the mind of the individual. So the whole key thing in a nutshell, dealing with probation, is to keep from putting people behind bars. Remember, I already said it is cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. And so I mentioned about probation challenge, and where students can get their GEDs. Did I mention probation challenge program that I participated in this course? I think I did earlier. Did I? Anybody remember? Anybody remember me talking about that? Well, it was a program where if you came before the judge and you qualified for probation, and you were a nonviolent offender, and you did not receive your high school diploma, you were given an opportunity to get in this program to get your GED, General Education Diploma. And if you did that, then it provided the opportunity for you to be released, and the charges were dropped. So, and again, it gets back to the point that it's a less expensive charge, because you have to feed and shelter these individuals. And so it's pretty expensive, whether it's jail or in prison. Yeah. So it's a good incentive. And also, we learned that those individuals who were involved in that program, and it's an actual program in existence now in Illinois in the state statute, but it actually started in a courtroom by a judge friend of mine who was actually my mentor, who I met when I was in law school. His son was my classmate, and it worked very well. And many of those people even went on to get other things like trades. They went on also to get, some even went on and got 4-year degrees. They went to a junior college after they finished the GED and received associates. And as I said, some went on to bachelor's. And one young man went on, and I don't know if he still is now, but he was a practicing lawyer. He was able to become a lawyer. And but the bottom line is that it helped the individual, and instead of being a detractor of society, a contributor to society. So intermediate sanctions, we start out with the lowest level, and depending upon the individual's behavior, we might add something differently to it. So their PO, or probation officer, here in this instance where we're using PO, they report several times a week. And so if they're doing well, following all the requirements that were set out by the probation, by the judge during probation, such as keeping themselves clean, no drugs, alcohol, those kind of things. And when they comply with those, then that's a good thing. And what it begins to do is turn the life around of the individual, getting them closer to what I like to refer to as getting to 6. You all know what I'm talking about when I say get to 6, right on the clock. Remember we talked about that some time ago? Everybody remember that? Where we send you in a new direction in life. Yep. So moving towards that. And so when you find yourself not satisfying conditions, such as if you have monitors on you and in home confinement and you're out longer, or you're not complying with whatever it is, then you can find yourself possibly going to jail. Trust me, that is not the desire or goal of the probation officer. Okay. And so the point of the matter is that you're given a chance. And of course, obviously, if you have individuals who need help with drugs and alcohol treatment, uh, those must be addressed. Otherwise, you're not going to have anybody going through. But anyway, these are some of the things that take place dealing with fines. You can work all the way to fines, to boot camp, to finding yourself in between. I already talked about these two. Boot camp is where you actually are exposed like you're in the military. Home confinement, where you have to be in the house. It's like we all under home confinement, right? At least with this pandemic. And you get a sense of what those individuals, except one difference. You can put on a mask and gloves and stuff like that, and you can go. But when you're in home confinement, you can only go under the parameters of the probation department. Of course, drugs, if you need help with that. Notice that if you notice one thing about this chart, and I had to point this out a couple of times to students, that it is right here where you find yourself changing over. Notice it's not quite in the middle, but it's really close to the middle. And that's a very serious issue that has to be dealt with. Day reporting centers where you as a probationer has to report to, and then dealing with drug alcohol treatment to keep you from getting over here in these situations. And then community service work. I have seen individuals where I've used them at our church when we were in the building to come in and help in the service to not necessarily the worship part, though we have done that, but primarily to get them to help clean up the place, those kinds of things. Then you have fines and restitution on the lower end. So you go over all of these and you begin to see really what they mean down here. Where it talks about shock incarceration, where a person is sentenced to jail, but after a short duration, the judge reduces the sentence because what it was is to teach them a lesson. Jail, it says, is so distasteful, the person will be motivated to remain a law-abiding or comply with the probation. In other words, to learn their lesson, that kind of thing. Doesn't work with most. But the key thing is that you come before the judge and there's still time on your sentence, and you kind of you've been monitored by the individuals at the jail or in the prison to see how you have been. Boot camp, as I said, is a form of shock where the individuals are in paramilitary type programs where they are actually in boot camp, like in the military, and they're very strenuous. And they like wake them up early in the morning. They make them make up their beds. They make them dress their attire. They don't let them droopy pants and all of that. And they do work. They work very, very hard. So it kind of gives them a chance. So these are some immediate sanctions, but there's a continuum. And the reason why it says continuum, from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. Okay. And so these are usually used by agencies to keep individuals. Probation officers use them to keep individuals from spending extended times in prison. Okay. And so let's look at how the probation officer. Now, one of the things that you should be aware of about probation officers is, can you become a probation officer with an associate's degree in most jurisdictions? The answer is correct. No, you cannot, because the probation officer is like a counselor. Yeah, in most states. I don't know of any. I know in Illinois it is, and I did know about your state as well, Minnesota. But I don't know of any states where the probation officer can be a probation officer without a bachelor's degree. And so the reason is because you're going to be like a therapist. You're going to be, as I said, a counselor, and all of those different things. So anyway, let's look at how the role evolved. So it says that today the community's belief is that the probation officer is like a police officer, but the probation officer is charged with more surveillance and supervision of individuals, as police officers are dealing with individuals who they suspect of committing crime. Remember, these individuals have already been found guilty of committing crimes. And so some equal it to babysitting, but it's not quite that, it's more than that. And so it's like law enforcement plus. But the key thing is they talk about the restorative justice philosophies. These are not used by law enforcement, but these are used generally for probation. And what it means is to give you some things that will, again, begin to point you in a direction where you won't become a recidivist. And then when it says evidence-based practices have changed the definition of probation and parole work. And so we're going to give you a few of those so you get a good idea about, and this is kind of helping you with your paper. So anyway, by the way, don't quote this thing here. Don't use this as a reference. This is just where you can find information. So 1980, this is how it started out. Look at how probation officers evolved. They had client contracts, home employment, and office visits, PSI investigations. Those are pre-sentence investigations. Whenever a person is about to be sentenced, a background check is done to see the history of criminology or lack of criminology on the parts of individuals to assist the judge in terms of reaching the correct disposition and sentence, and to help the lawyers to be able to determine what is about right for what the individual is about to be sentenced for. They deal with the violation reports because they file reports of what we call VOPs, violation of probation, where there's hearings, as I said, and those hearings are based upon not not a finding beyond a reasonable doubt, but the standard preponderance of the evidence or clear and convincing evidence, like a civil case here, as far as a violation is concerned. Transfer investigations, moving individuals from one jurisdiction to another. They take you from one place to another if you, and that happens where individuals are moved to get away from the environment that they're in those situations. Pre-release from prison investigation as well. They look at those because what's going to happen is that those individuals are going to be watched by them over that period that they still have a sentence. Court appearances and testimony, obviously that's one of the jobs that the probation officer will do. So by 1996, it included the following: progress reports to update the court as to how the person's doing, bail evaluations, sentence guideline worksheets, conditional release, individuals released from parole, determination there should be fines, transporting back again to what the individuals, taking them to different jurisdictions and places, back and forth to sometimes to various courts. Sometimes they have to testify. Monitoring the programs that individuals are involved in to determine is it benefiting them. Community service work referrals, such as working with churches and social organizations to provide community service to probationers. Dealing with whether or not there's a gambling problem or not. You begin to see therapists or social worker fitting in here. By 2009, they also added these restitution statements for victim impact and neighborhood impact. Those are usually presented at hearings to determine how the individual is operated in the past. Dealing with evaluations for sex offenders to determine what you have to do as far as them, dealing with registration, of course now DNA testing, violence assessment, and there's a whole bunch of other tests, drug testing, and things of that nature. Motivational interviewing for skills, case planning, school district notifications to let them know about individuals who are in their districts, sex offender registrations, they're responsible for setting that up generally. And then other things here, electronic monitoring, diversion programming. And now, in addition to that, you'll see this is why you really see that you need a bachelor's. Um, Assessments and annual proficiency required, uh, core correctional skills, such as effective reinforcement. The key thing here is that what you're doing is you're making sure that that individual is not getting into trouble, keeping them out of trouble, those kind of things. Um, Additional responsibility, R&R, and then the treatment principles dealing with whether it's substance abuse or alcohol and those kinds of things, and dealing with a whole bunch of things, understanding notice that you're involved with the research and outcome and collecting of data. That's why we have requirements that are very high for that. And then finally, the PO today is called, as they refer to as a change agent, is not only responsible for the public safety through surveillance and supervision, but also for working individually with offenders to make sure they receive skills, opportunities to be able to get vocations and further education to change their directions in life. And and then that takes us back to the beginning. Of course, though, now the last thing, and this is for you. Make sure I say this every week. Just take the time to do this, do the quiz to help you again line these up. Let's see if we can match these three right quick. Procedural due process. What is that? What is it? Okay, nobody knows. It's actually one of the two that are left over. What about hands-off policy? Yeah. Okay, so that means then, what is case law? We already talked about that. I called it stare decisis. What is it? Yep. So that takes you back to the question. Procedural due process. When you see constitutional guarantees that no agent will use any procedures other than those described or prescribed by law. Okay. And that's what it is. And I guarantee you submit these. These are all correct. Yep. So you're going to do the same thing and go through each of these. Okay. Oops. Let's get it back. There we go. Let's take that out. All righty. And with that, any questions about anything? How about a suggestion for the key phrase? Anybody else? I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Because you was trying to get out so fast. I know we do that all the time. So guess what? Both of you picked the top two because that's what we've been talking about. So what do you think is the one that it ought to be? Which one? All right. All right. We're gonna have to just borrow Trinity from. I have a friend. Do everybody know what Kahoot is? Everybody know the game Kahoot? Yeah. I have one person that I know. We said she can't play with us because she's always getting them. All right. So Trinity is almost like Kahoot when it comes to guessing these. So it is probation officer. That's the key phrase for today. All right. So if anybody said I didn't say it, I'm not saying it again. I already said it. Uh, oh God. I tell you something. Everybody's gonna be calling Trinity. What's the word for the day, Trinity? I'll, I'll probably never forget you, in, no matter what classes I have. And say, "Oh, here she comes again in another class." Yeah. So you guys have a good evening. Enjoy what's left of your week. Tomorrow, Friday. Stay safe. I will see you again. Remember, we're going back to our regular schedule, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I encourage you guys to stay safe, and a special prayer for my students who are in Florida, because I've talked to a number of people so who about Florida. Either you guys in Florida? Oh, okay. Taylor. Anybody else? Anybody else? I think you're in Minnesota, Trinity, right? Yeah. Yeah, you're almost up there by, there's one, I think, is it North Dakota? I think that has a problem up there, or is it South Dakota? One of those Dakotas up there have a problem. Um, well, 10 do not recommend Florida. Yeah, well, I, I'll say this before I let you guys go. A year ago, today, we were just getting back from Florida because we celebrated our wedding anniversary last year, 25 years, and that was we were in Florida. So Moorhead, Minnesota is, yeah, Fargo, yeah, Fargo is North Dakota is a big city that's far. I think it's North Dakota that has the problem. So anyway, you guys just stay safe, and even if you're not in a hot spot, the way you contribute to not going in a hot spot is definitely wear a mask when you're out. Wear it. I mean, it's people talking about I have my rights. Well, I do too. I have my right to continue to live, and you know what? Let's people need to stop being uh, rock headed and just simply just focus on the realities of this. This thing is not going away unless we listen to people like Dr. Fauci. And see, Taylor, you got it. Your grandmother died of COVID. People who lose people really get it. I watch 60, not 60 Minutes. I watch Nightline almost every night, and last night they had a real good feature on it. And this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. It's a thing that we can't see, but it is destroying the future. There are young people now that are catching it, and as I said, the bad part about it is that um, it's you can pass it on very easily, and you can wipe out a whole household. I've seen families where 8 people in a household got it, and some didn't make it. You know, uh, yeah, masks do. But yeah, but so does getting COVID. COVID doesn't suck, so COVID kills. So I'd rather wear a mask that sucks than to get COVID and pass away. So, all right, guys, I'm on my soapbox. Stay safe. See you guys next week. And if you have any questions, again, just remember there's only one column in the rubric, and that's the far right. Okay. So good night, guys. See you next week.